behalf of our team, we want to tell you something about the life history of a new island that formed in the Pacific that we believe tells a unique story. And that story is unique because we've been able to capture it from satellite and ship-based measurements for the first time for an island of this sort in the modern era. So today we're going to tell you the story of Hunga Tonga Hunga Hape. Hard to say, but an important island nonetheless, because we have not had an island like this sustain itself for as long as this one has in 50 years. So let's start with the birth, always important when you look at the life history of our families and islands. So in late December 2014, we were alerted with our satellite alert system, with NASA's Earth Observing System, that there was an ash cloud forming in the Pacific north of New Zealand in the archipelago of the Kingdom of Tonga. This alert was very exciting because there had been previous volcanic activity there before in 2009 and many times in the previous centuries. The alert also triggered interest by local tourists, as you can see in the image, and by other officials from nearby nations. And we were able to see that this was a unique eruption, because it was not only a shallow submarine eruption that produced some lava, it also produced some of the explosive magma-water interactions that were the hallmark of the eruption that formed Surtsey Island off the coast of Iceland in the 60s and Capelinos off the coast of one of the islands in the Azores. So we were excited, but we were especially excited when a first image from space collected by the French space agency Airbus system was acquired basically on spec to catch the last moments of the formation of this island. So in 1 month, 1/10 or 2/10 of a cubic kilometer of new stuff formed an island that has the footprint you see here. It's about 2 kilometers in square kilometers in area, 120 meters in relief, and it gives the appearance of a classic tuff cone, a circular volcano with a central collapse crater, flanked by pyroclastic flows, lava flows, and other things. In this case, right in between two adjacent land masses, Hunga Hape to the west and Hunga Tonga to the northeast. That's why we call the island Hunga Tonga Hunga Hape unofficially. So what really piqued our interest was the fact that islands like this were long recognized as being extremely ephemeral landscape systems. They form, as you can see in this cartoon that appeared on the web a couple months after formation. This is actually adapted from many textbooks in ocean island evolution, such as those by Patrick Nunn and others. But we form a new island. One stage of that island formation is a dynamic ash cloud. Volcanic ash produced the landscape. And then the new island stands above sea level, and it washes away in 3 or 4 months because of the action of marine abrasion being such a powerful erosive force. So in this case, this is what the expectation was. But ye of little faith, this island has lasted far beyond that expectation. And this is because of a series of things that we've been able to observe at human scale from space using the high-resolution satellite remote sensing capabilities that now exist. And that includes both optical and radar. So on the left, you can see the island as of literally the terminal stages of its birth, and then flash forward 3 years, 30-some months, and you can see the island as it looks today on the right with the outline of the coast. Now, this is great. So the island's changed, but it's still there. How long will it last? What stages in its life cycle can we recognize? So our interest was to not only look at the island in 2 dimensions, fun as that is, but expand it to 3 dimensions where we can measure important parameters such as the volume, which is a parameter that relates to the mass, and the mass to the mass transfer in the system. And our interest was going from the early life history, as you see on the left in this color-coded topographic map at meter scale with contours that would be as fine as a foot, to the stage you see on the right through a sequence of time steps. It's kind of like watching your kids grow up. They get taller, maybe they gain or lose weight. In this case, the island is losing mass to the pounding of marine abrasion from the south, but that mass is being redistributed and reforming as an isthmus or tombolo to the northeast, and a large area of flat land shown in the blue on the right is this 500-meter wide connecting land bridge, if you will, that's allowing the system to partially survive. So one of the things we were most interested in was asking ourselves, and I asked myself this personally, is this a South Pacific version of this canonical island system known as Surtsey off the coast of Iceland? Long studied because against all odds, it survived for more than 50 years. And it survived in part because of the chemistry, the geochemistry of hot waters cementing these friable volcanic ash deposits into stuff as hard as concrete. And this has long been recognized in volcanoes in Italy, in the Azores, and in Iceland. But here at Surtsey on the left, you can see topography from our NASA LiDAR scanning missions there about a decade ago. The island's surviving. And so we asked ourselves, because that island was formed by shallow submarine eruptions, is Hunga on the right going through the same life cycle? Can we expect that kind of longevity, and can we watch those stages from space with a time-lapse photography of what's going on? Now, one of the important things is that when you look at these landscapes on the ground, they're still profoundly different. The chemistry of the primary ash and lava and Surtsey is different on the left. You can see a field view that we took a few years ago showing runnels and gullies in Surtsey. And on the right, you see Hunga, images taken by two French citizen scientists, sailors that visited the island on our behalf. Very different stages of incision. So one of the reasons we're very interested in this island system is also its setting, and Vicki's going to go into all the details. But the important thing to note is this island is sitting basically in the higher reaches of a major submarine volcano called Hunga. Who would have guessed? But anyway, that volcano is important. It's a very large edifice, and in its shallows, there's lots of opportunities for shallow magma-water interactions. And those are very important because they produce lands like Surtsey, like Hunga, but they also give us a chance to watch them go through their dance against erosion. And the most recent image we have from the Canadian Space Agency RadarSat view just shows the continuing evolution of the island. Here it looks like a shaded relief map. It's actually inverted radar backscatter. But you can see widening of the erosional rills and gullies, slumps inside the crater. So this island is fighting for its life. And our predictions suggest, on the basis of volume measurements that Dan will talk about, that we've got potentially another couple of decades of life to watch this thing evolve from space, from ship. So the final point I'll make is it's important when we look at taking what we're learning from watching the life story of Hunga across the ocean environment on Earth, but also applying what we learn from that to other worlds. And we can do that very effectively with Mars, where we see fields of small volcanoes very reminiscent of those like Hunga, like Surtsey, but we don't know the context in which they formed. They're perhaps very old. We think they may have formed in some recent literature through the eruptions through shallow waters. And the question is, are the different appearances, different topologies of Hunga an indicator of some of the different stages that we might be able to recognize on Mars and get measurements of potential water depth at time of eruption or degree of persistence of water that may have allowed us to recognize that these islands sat around in shallow water environments during those times in the Martian climate history when it was more clement. So we think there's a real opportunity for learning, for the details about the evolution and life cycle of this island, both on land and undersea. I'm going to turn it to my co-authors. First, Dan Slayback, and then Vicki Ferrini. Dan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jim. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the, let's get going, some more details about the satellite imagery that we used and some of the measurements that we've taken out of that set of imagery. So to start with, we put together an animation, how do I get this starting, showing the sequence of imagery we have to date, so over the last 30-some months, starting with the January 19th, 2015 image you see here. So this is all mostly Digital Globe Worldview 1 and Worldview 2 satellite imagery, and also some Airbus Pleiades satellite imagery. It's about 0.5 meter native resolution, and much of the imagery is stereo, so we get two looks shortly one after one another, and from the stereo imagery we generate elevation models. What you see here is the imagery data draped on the elevation model, so you can get a photorealistic 3D view without actually flying an aircraft, as it looks like we're doing. It'll play again. So there's two major kind of events you can easily see in this video. The first is this erosion of the southeast face of the tuff cone. This briefly opens up the crater lake to the ocean directly. And the other major landform change is this peninsula that's extending on the lower right of the screen to the pre-existing eastern island. So this is the view from space. I mean, the satellites are 500 or 600 miles up, whatever they are. But we also were fortunate, as Jim mentioned, to be in touch with some French sailors who took some video, samples, photographs for it. Oops. So here's some video they took from the top of the cone, the rim of the crater at about 120 meters or 400 feet roughly. There's Damien standing precariously on the edge, panning around to the pre-existing western island you see in the distance. You'll also see some vegetation. Keep going. Oh, you get a rerun. There's some vegetation you can see growing in some of the new sediments off to the far right once we continue this pan around. We're having a video problem. Well, we'll skip the rest of the video. It just showed the interior of the crater walls, which Jim had some slides on, which are extremely steep. And I'll talk about that again right now. So back to the satellite imagery, here's just a nadir view from straight up, looking at these two major areas of change that we tracked. So the first was this erosion from the southeast of the crater wall. And by late April, so just 4 months after the eruption had ceased, there was just a remnant of that crater wall standing. Those triangular sections there are about 10 meters, 30 or 40 feet tall. But within a few weeks, they were gone. And so this opened the crater lake to the ocean. And at this point, there was a risk that if you have open ocean waves impacting those extremely steep 400 feet tall cliffs on the inside of the crater, you might have really greatly accelerated erosion and destruction of this edifice. But lo and behold, within a few weeks, a sandbar had formed, which protected the crater lake and the crater from such ocean waves. And that's persisted to date. But that whole southeastern face continues to kind of erode towards the northwest. The other major change we observed was this peninsula forming to the northeast. This started within weeks of the eruption ceasing, grew rapidly. Here in March, it's almost across. By April, it's connected. And since that time, it's just continued to widen. At present, it's about 500 meters wide. And so that's the material from that eroding tuff cone being redeposited here, also to the southwest. So in terms of what our measurements we've taken, the first thing was simply measure the area. This is obvious and easy and simple to do. So with each of the high-resolution acquisitions we took, we traced the coastline, and those are displayed on the left with the different colors. So initially, it was a fairly round edifice, but over time, as the southeast slope was being eroded inwards, it's become an almost linear feature. And the areas of those are displayed in the right. So you have two countervailing forces, the erosion of the tuff cone and the deposition of the sediments from the tuff cone. So the deposition is increasing, the erosion is decreasing, and overall at the top, the total new land area is fairly stable. I mean, it's slightly increasing, but it's a little surprising because of what you see happening. You expect dramatic change, and when we first just looked at the total area, it's like not much going on here, and that's because area is just, it's a poor reflection of the mass distribution. And so what we really are interested in is the mass, and we get at that through the volume. So the elevation models we generated, this shows a composite of 3 different elevation models across 2015, 16, and 17. So it again just kind of shows the zones of change from erosion in the red and yellow to deposition in blue and cyan, and areas that have both, especially those beach areas. There's a lot of deposition, then it erodes away and it maybe moves somewhere else and it comes back, or exactly what's going on, we don't know, but it's fairly dynamic. And so if we take all of our volume measurements and plot them up, this is what we get. And initially, at the first 6 months, a linear fit to those data had a very steep decline. So if that trend had continued, we would have expected maybe a 6-year lifetime. But at about the 6-month mark, the rate of change changed, decreased. So if we fit a simple linear fit to all of our data to date, we get maybe a 26 to 30-year lifetime. And that's, of course, may well change. If that sandbar opens up the crater to the ocean, we would expect hastening of the erosion. And the other part of this is what's happening under the water, and that's probably controlling a lot of the erosion rates and where it's happening. But we didn't know anything about that, so that's why we got in touch with Vicki, who conveniently was out there, and she will talk about what she has found.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to tell you about the parts of this landmass that can't be observed from space and have to be observed from ships or other sensors in the ocean. So the way that I got pulled into this project is I was actually on a research cruise on the RV Falkor, which is operated by Schmidt Ocean Institute in the South Pacific with a bunch of biologists working on hydrothermal vents. We were using a remote operated vehicle with support from NSF, and we were conducting deep water experiments and sample acquisition. And while we were out there, we had some very bad weather, which made it very difficult and unsafe to operate the remote operated vehicle, which is on a high tension cable with a lot of electricity, so this became a mapping opportunity. And through the network of people and community and just sort of opportunity, we got word of the need for mapping the island of Hunga. And so this map shows our study sites on the left, the red dots in the spreading center in the deep water where we were working, and the blow up on the right with the red box shows where the island of interest is located. And it was relatively close by, so in the bad weather we were able to break off of our initial mission and go and conduct this mapping exercise. So Jim sent us the map that's up in the top left corner there, which is one of the satellite DEMs that shows us the new land mass located within the pre-existing islands, and gave us some pointers and arrows of areas of interest and said whatever you can get would be great. And so we had the RV Falkor, as I mentioned. It's got 2 multi-beam mapping sonar systems, one for shallow water, one for deep water. It also has a forward-looking sonar, which at the time was not operational, but the ship's crew pulled together and put in some extra time to get that functional so we could use that for obstacle avoidance. And we also had live streaming capabilities to YouTube, so we could actually have Jim join us virtually and watch as we were collecting the data. The picture on the bottom left shows both the island as they were pulling up to it, which was fairly otherworldly. It was really exciting to pull up to. And the bottom panel on the screen there in the wheelhouse shows the nautical chart. You can see there's 2 islands shown, and there's not much other information. So we were really kind of charting the unknown, and it was a very exciting opportunity and also, fairly dangerous. So just a little bit about how the multi-beam works. We're looking down through the water and also off to the side a little bit. And so the way that we conducted the survey very carefully was to work from deeper water into shallower water, always looking to see toward the shallows where we might be able to pass on the next trip around and get closer and closer. And eventually we were able to find an opening that we could get through safely into the inside of the caldera of this big volcano. So this is the new bathymetry data that we collected around the island. The black indicates data gaps. This is gridded at 5-meter resolution. What you can see is that the island that sticks up above the water is on the northern rim of a larger volcano, and just on the inside of the caldera that's there. If we go to the next slide, we profile over this. The volcano sticks up about 1.4 kilometers from the adjacent seafloor. And you can also see that the new island, which is the kind of beige color there, is actually kind of inside this teacup at the rim, inside of the caldera, which very likely has something to do with how it's being preserved and not eroded downslope. This is an oblique view, just giving you a sense of what the caldera looks like. The floor of it is very flat. It's about 155 meters, remarkably flat, really. Around the rim of the caldera, particularly on the south, there are a lot of volcanic domes with craters in the top of them. So it's a very highly volcanically active area. And another thing to point out here is in the upper data gap off to just south of that island, the pre-existing island, there was an eruption that occurred in 2009 similar style of eruption, and that landmass only lasted a few months, and it's been eroded away. And that could be because of its location right on the rim of the caldera. And we can actually measure some of the change downslope with deposition of that material. So within the caldera itself, we can actually identify the submarine extent of the new cone from this eruption. It's at about 155 meters water depth, and it's about 1 kilometer offshore of the coast of the island. If we put contours on here, you can see a little bit more of the structure, including the continuity of the blowout from the crater above water into the submarine areas. And also, perhaps most importantly, in the shallow areas, we see that the bathymetry, the seafloor starts to level out and become like a shelf. And so we think that this is part of what's helping to constrain the sediments as they're eroded from the new landmass and actually redeposited in the shallow water. So with that, I'd just like to point out that we are just 3 people of a much larger team and acknowledge all of our partners, of which there are many. And then I think I will move on to this slide and open up for questions.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Reporters in the room, if you have a question, please raise your hand and state your name and affiliation. Are there any questions from reporters in the room?
We have 2 hands going up or not going up.
Hi, Jonathan Amos from the BBC. Can you draw some more links to Mars? I mean, there's a lot of interest currently in looking for hydrothermal activity or evidence of past hydrothermal activity on Mars. There seems to be, certainly from some of the orbital data, mineralogy that speaks to that activity. And of course, on Earth, we know volcanic submarine systems are places where you find a lot of life. So I just wondered if you could sort of draw some links there.
So let me start, and I'll turn to Vicki, but here's the way this could be linked. So on Mars, we've detected with the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter vast fields of small volcanic cones in multiple places. Recent work by the team led by Alfred McEwen at Arizona and others have led to the conclusion that some of these cones could have been produced by hydromagmatic eruptions on the basis of their shapes and their landform topologies at meter scale, the same scale that Dan and Vicki were talking about just a minute ago. Some of them even have very, what should I say, suggestive structures that are reminiscent of the things we were showing you at Hunga Tonga Hunga Pe. So the question is, if those really were magma-water interactions, well, how deep was the water? Because really deep water produces a very characteristic, and Vicki can describe that in a second, type of topology of landscape without the kind of explosive phase that produces these classic tuff cones. And in fact, Hunga Tonga Hunga Pe experienced a full basal surge, which produced the platform on which the rest of the ash formed, just like at Surtsey, just like at Capelinos, just like at many others that I won't name. So the thought is, John, that maybe if we can understand the life stages of Hunga Tonga Hunga Pe, we can apply it forward to Mars and say, where do we see those morphologies? And we can make DEMs of Martian volcanoes with high-rise in stereo. MRO has done that. And ask, if we look at the different life stages of Hunga Tonga Hunga Pe, can we make predictions about water depth at time of eruption and potential persistence lifetimes for the water? In other words, if marine wave action is operating, we can look at the times rates of change that we predict on Earth in the shallow waters around this volcano in particular, and even around Surtsey, where water depths are only a few hundred meters in that part of the Reykjanes area. So perhaps by linking what we see here with the quantitative measurements that you heard, we can look at the Martian record as we've measured with MRO and ask, where was the water shallow and persistent enough to see those effects? And that will give us a window into some of those murkier times on Mars when we think there were standing bodies of water. Obviously, they weren't instantaneous, because obviously then you wouldn't see a magma-water interaction producing cones that remind us of these. But was it persistent? Did we see cliff lines with erosion and the kinds of patterns we've seen here? Well, we have to go look. And so that's an exciting way to link persistence of water in a shallow marine environment in Mars. And of course, we see the fluviatile environment in Gale with Curiosity and in other places, but that would be standing bodies of water in which volcanoes erupt. I don't know if Vicki wants to add to the seafloor elements. Well, oh, is that
Is this
one?
one on? They're on?
They're all on. Oh, yep, definitely.
So I think,
That one's on.
I think I would just echo what you said. What's particularly exciting with this island is that we not only have the opportunity to observe it with remote observations, like from space, but we can actually go there and collect samples and really understand and use it more as a laboratory that we can engage with more readily. And so we have the potential to learn more here that we can use to help decipher what we're looking at in space.
Okay, Sid?
Hi, Sid Burke. Oh, hi, Sid Perkins. I'm a freelancer. I just wanted to know if anybody has any knowledge of the age of the pre-existing islands, and is their presence going to help protect the new island from prevailing currents and waves and such?
Well, let me start and then I'll turn to Vicki. So Bill Bryan, who used to be at Woods Hole and trained several of us, lucky enough to work with him, he did some seminal work on this region of the Kermadec-Tonga back arc system of volcanoes back in the 60s and 70s. And so on the basis of chemistry and some age dating, the two nearby islands, Hunga and Hunga Tonga, are historic, last few thousand years, and probably a higher standing topography that's withstood the barrages of marine abrasion because they were bigger. And this was a 1-month eruption that we had captured. And so we know the age of that, of course. But the whole bigger volcano, I don't know, Vicki, how long you think Hunga has been around as a big edifice? I mean, it's a lot of rock. And even this little eruption, if we take Vicki's numbers and project it, and this is purely just math, not understanding yet, you get a total eruption volume of 0.5 cubic kilometers. That's 4 times Surtsey from the seafloor. So this was a very productive little eruption in a unique setting. Those two islands, and I think Vicki and Dan said it better than I will say now, may be part of the ingredients for protecting the pattern of marine abrasion, allowing the redeposition, and producing this quasi-closed system that even in the end state, it may be a connecting land bridge called a tombolo between the two older islands, still expressing some of the innards, the inner superstructure of the tuff cone, which will be very exciting to see. And we're having it in our lifetime makes it even more exciting. I don't know, Vicki, if you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, having looked at it with my own eyes, those two islands are very consolidated hard material. There are some areas where there is some blocks that look like they've been broken off and they're slumping away, but there's very well-established vegetation on one of the islands, so it's pretty hard. What's also interesting, though, is that on the very northern rim of the caldera between the two islands, right on the edge of where the new island is, there's a pretty wide opening, which you would think would help to allow this material to just flow downslope, and it doesn't seem to be doing that. So there might be some other structure in shallower where we weren't able to map. So it's one of the many reasons that we'd like to get back there and get into the shallows and really connect the two data coverages that we have.
Well, and one thing I'd just like to add, our French citizen science sailors, with the permission of the Kingdom of Tonga, visited the island for us, our team, all the people you saw, and collected samples. And we've been looking at those in search of geochemical, mineralogical indications of things that might help cement this island better against the ravages of marine abrasion and rain. And we do have some early indications of that. Some beautiful lapilli-covered volcanic lavas were detected from the basal unit. So this was a mixed eruption of ash and lava, as we would anticipate. And that may also help to buttress its lifetime. There may be pillow lavas at depth that the sonar side scan data would show, and we can look at that. So there's a very interesting system here that's allowed this opportunity. In 2009, such an interesting system washed away in 3 months. So this is a very exciting opportunity for all of us.
Christoph Seidler, Spiegel Online. Trying to follow up on Jonathan's question with the link to Mars, because that's how you lured us all in here. Maybe that's a silly question, but I'm still trying to understand the time scales here. I mean, when we're talking about the evolution of the island, we're talking about several years. When we talk about water on Mars changing, disappearing, that sounds to me like much longer time periods. How can we even compare that?
So here's, and I'll take a shot and then let Vicki and Dan. So maybe I did a poor job explaining. So we have a landform, and we're watching it move, as you saw in the videos, and we're measuring its three-dimensional shape below the water and, of course, above. And we're catching freeze frame different stages of its evolution, okay? And we know what's going on under all those states on Earth with a big warm, wet atmosphere and all the good stuff we have here. So then we see things that remind us of this kind of volcano at similar scales on Mars. And literally, there's thousands of them in multiple regions. And they've been studied both by the HiRISE team and by scientists in the Czech Republic and elsewhere. And the supposition is that there was tens of meters of water, regionally wide scale enough in depressions or other features in the then Mars. And we're talking perhaps 1 to 2 billion years ago, given the way the crater count age structures are arranged for Mars. But anyway, there must have been that level of water to produce landscapes. Geomorphology doesn't lie. Produces a landform as a function of environmental conditions and other things in the volcanology. So we have an eruption on Earth. It's accelerated time lapse on its erosion because it's in this big marine environment. On Mars, that environment may have been very ephemeral. Shallow water, it's there, the thing erupts, it gets to the island, and then all the marine stuff is gone, and the thing is frozen in time in an arrested state of development, or not. And by looking at these things in more detail from HiRISE and even from CRISM, the mineral mapper, we can start to put time constraints on those, because persistence of water is one of those holy grails on Mars, particularly if we're interested in microbial systems and all that, and hydrothermal. And I didn't mention, this island has a beautiful set of chemistry characteristics that we have not been able to measure yet with hyperspectral imaging to do this sort of regional mineralogy, like we do on Mars with the CRISM experiment, for example, on MRO. So that's another dimension of the things we'd like to do, because that will inform us about mineralogies. One of the mineralogies we'd love to see are these hydrothermally altered ashes, which produce, I'll use the words, sorry folks, use characteristic mineralogies of pelagonites, and we can detect some of the key minerals in those. We think we found evidence of some hydrothermal minerals in some of the samples we have, but we haven't published that yet. We're still working on that. So if that's the case, we know how to look for those on Mars. We found them on Mars. We know how to look for them and understand where they are on Earth. So that's the connection. The lifetime of the water that was involved in the eruption and the erosion. And maybe on Mars it's always short little bursts in the cryo-Mars that's now an emergent view from recent work. Or maybe it isn't, and maybe this would be a way of using landforms to inform that. Does that help?
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
We have a question on the web chat.
We have a question from Kathy N. Kowalski, who's a freelancer. She says, so does it seem that the fact that there's a much bigger volcanic mass explaining why this one has stuck around so far? And then she has more if you want to hear it.
Vicki, do you want to provide your views from, you've looked at the bigger mass from your ship?
Well, I mean, certainly the size of this island is probably part of the story, and the location of it is another important piece. And then the part that we don't really know very well yet is what chemical processes are happening and what kind of hardening is actually happening within the landmass that's there. So that's something that we hope to get at.
In other words, one of the things that made Surtsey special is this special warm water circulating in ash that makes a concrete-like stuff that is called pelagonite and other things, and other minerals that are indicative of that kind of process, zeolites, which are actually, I mean, industrially valuable. Those things fortify volcanoes in this marine environment, and weak ash that you could dig with a shovel turns into concrete that you can't break with a rock hammer. Trust me, having pounded away at rocks on Surtsey, some of them just don't break, and I'm maybe weak as a guy, whatever. So we want to look for that. It's hard to, from the topology, we can see some evidence of that with steep slopes still preserved and in minerals and in some of the landscape forms. But we haven't fully deciphered that. That's why we need to go back.
Okay, she goes on and says, and if you try to project further in time here on Earth, is it likely that more of these land masses will form and can connect together in the area?
That's a very good question. The archipelago's rich.
Good question.
I mean, we were shocked. To be honest, I have to say, I was so phenomenally pleased that we were able to see one of these that actually lasted, to watch it go through these life stages, because it's rare. And if you look at the history of the last couple thousand years of human awareness of these kind of volcanoes, there's Surtsey, Capelinos, Agoya up at Jan Mayen, hardly many people live there, at 71 North. A couple others in the Pacific, this one, and there they are. Now, lava eruptions produce islands that stay around a lot longer. And when we have those, there's one that formed in Japan and in the Red Sea recently, they form a different topology, and you can tell the difference. And they are big masses of lava, and they erode differently. So this system is very interesting, and the hydrothermal aspects, the warm water aspects are really exciting. And there's an astrobiological link, because life gets its start really fast here on Earth anywhere. So how did that work on Mars? Sort of.
Are there any other questions from reporters in the room? Oh, there's another question on the chat.
She's got one more. She says, there was a mention of vegetation. What are the first colonizers?
Well, what we've seen, but I should say a British explorer, apparently wealthy, visited the island in March, and he goes to uninhabited desert islands and produced a beautiful blog-like video of being there for 10 days, and it's on the web. It's wonderful. And he saw small vascular plants growing, probably from basically bird poop brought the seeds, and they very quickly grew. The soils are quite rich, even though the chemistry of the island is what we call basaltic andesite. But our French colleagues were there, and they saw a whole field of grasses, higher order vascular plants, growing in the wind-protected area in between Hunga and the new island. And that's an area which is out of the primary, I guess, wind flow, and also a good place for mooring small boats because you're not being buffeted by the waves. And, but the birds are all over, and they're dropping their remnants everywhere, and that's producing an ecology. Now, the fine-scale ecology, the microbial stuff happening, even preserved in the rock glasses, we haven't looked at yet. I think some colleagues in New Zealand are. And nowadays, in the Surtsey volcanic glasses, people found microbial life frozen in. So that was reported at the 50th anniversary of Surtsey in 2013 in Reykjavik. So I suspect there's all kinds of interesting, biologically relevant stuff going on as this island goes through an ecological succession cycle. The warm waters in that crater lake have a very interesting chemistry that needs further attention. Most people keep away from them because there are certain implications, and I don't know what those are, but they would not be the best place to go for a swim, probably.
Sorry, just to emphasize that last point, if we go to Mars, then there may well be volcanic glasses at these tough cones that also preserve microbial life. If the water, as these islands show us, was around for a significant enough period to enable that.
Well, I think, John, the question is, if whatever produces the onset of what we would call biology, if it exists and warm waters are persistent long enough for that chemistry to do its magic, still trying to learn that, and as you know, the astrobiology community have lots of great progress in that, then that would be a good place to look. And we've always thought the hydrothermal systems preserved as the younger, particularly with the kind of minerals that are biological signature preservation potential rich, would be a good place to go. But again, we don't know what that life onset thing is on Mars, and that's why we're going, and that's why we want to bring samples back, because you can pick them apart at much finer scale. Femtomole scale is pretty cool.
Yeah. But I mean, these cones on Mars, there might be interesting places to go with rovers if you can get rovers in.
Absolutely.
There. Yeah.
And now with HiRISE, we can image them in 3D, like Dan showed, and make your own animation flyover of them, and that's pretty exciting. Oh, there's a question there.
I just had a little question about the kind of methodology and the safety, really, like the practicalities of actually landing there and studying the island. So at what point do you know that it is safe to send your colleagues or to land a boat there and walk up and actually be on the island? And how much of the kind of knowledge and understanding of the geology of it comes into making that decision about timing, but also like picking your route onto a safe place on that island to stand and study?
Well, I can't speak for everyone, and I think Vicki needs to speak from the ship based, and Dan as well. But I'll tell you the thought process we use, and it comes from NASA sending people, hopefully, to the moon and Mars, kind of thing. So, friable, thermally active landscapes are fundamentally geologically unstable. So don't send your kids in blind. I mean, I don't mean to say that, or your dogs, I mean, for that matter. I mean, really, one has to go in with one's eyes wide open. But brave scientists and explorers like to go to cool places and understand what's going on, and you can't keep them away. I mean, Surtsey is now a United Nations World Heritage Site to protect it for the Icelandic people in the world to use. This island has an instability. You saw in Dan's video, you know, friable ash above the angle of repose sitting there waiting to crumble, and under the sea as well. So one needs to plan accordingly. When we work with our French citizen scientist colleagues, Damien and Cecile, we basically gave them an EVA map for sampling and imaging with suggested targets, the way we would plan to send women or men to Mars or the Moon. Well, not the way, but sort of the way, since some of us do that. And they followed it to a T. In fact, they were better than I would ever have been had I had the great fortune of going. They visited every spot, labeled everything, GPS coordinates for everything, took the photos we wanted, even 3D documented them the way it was spectacular. And they followed the rules. They didn't, you know, try to go swimming in the lake without thinking about its chemistry and anything else that would be bad. And really, spectacular. So they followed what we thought would be safety relevant rules. I can't speak for other scientists that have visited. I know volcanologists from New Zealand have been there and collected some great work. I think they're doing sample analysis. Vicki, what's your view, having been really close?
Well, I would first say that part of the excitement of exploration is the unknown and the uncertainty. In terms of being on the land, I mean, I've climbed a volcano that erupted the next day, so there's always that concern. From the ship, I mean, we have a bit of a safe distance, relatively speaking. And, you know, trying to avoid obstacles for navigation purposes was the key thing. And I think the piece in terms of trying to go back and do more work there is the most efficient way to map the shallows is going to be with autonomous vehicles. And so that gives us a little bit more safety kind of built in.
I think we have another question on the chat.
How do you find the blog with the videos? This is from Rick Lovett, who's a freelancer.
I think we had it on the final slide. Oh, the blog. We have the
or I guess he can email Ellen. Yeah. He can email Ellen. And
if you Google Hunga Tonga Hunga Pe eruption, you'll see this explorer's video and image blog. It's really impressive. It was spring of 2015. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact name, but that's a good question, and that shows how brave some people are.
Are there any other questions from reporters in the room? Are there any other questions on the chat? No? Okay, great. That concludes our press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And next up, at 10:30, assessing flood risk in the U.S. and the consequences of sea level rise.
I think they want these old guys for Snapchat.
Yes, all of the